with wisdom graven in the wrinkles of her calloused hands, once looked me in the eyes and said, "You hungry?" And she offered me a chip. Do you think humans would get hungry if there was no such thing as food? My phone buzzed in my pocket, but she grabbed my arm and said, "Don't look at it. Just let it sit there, bathing in its own electric light." I asked her why. I said, "I want to look." She grinned at me and said, "I thought you might. Just wait, though, for a minute. Feel what's happening in your gut. Feel how much you want to look, because it's probably nothing special, right? What is it that you're hungry for? What is it that you need? What would calm that itch, do you think? Or should you just scratch it till it bleeds? Are you aching for connection? Are you itching to be known? Are you longing to belong again? Or is it actually just your phone? She chuckled and she sat me down and looked up into the whirling sky. The rivers flow and flow into the sea, but is it ever full? The wind blows fierce from west to east, then east to west, but does it ever find where it was going to and rest? All things are full of weariness, so deep we cannot utter it. All breathing things are aching, child. All longing things frustrated. Do you think you'll ever have enough? Do you think you could take hold of it? Can you close your fingers on the sun or catch a handful of the morning mist? Tell me what got so shattered in our hearts that joy leaks softly through the cracks? What got so broken in this world of ours that peace can't bear to face the facts? Tell me why I'm always hungry. Tell me why I'm always scared. Tell me why I can't get hold of things. Tell me why my heart still cares. Tell me why I'm always thirsty. Tell me why I'm not enough. Give me something. Give me something more than empty words and hollow stuff. She shook her head and laughed at herself and had another chip. Seriously, do you think we would get hungry if there was no such thing as food? They'll tell you on those screens of yours that there's nothing more than surface. That you've got to tap and watch and spend, because in the end, you've got no purpose. They'll tell you epic stories that grasp your heart and make you feel about love and sacrifice and meaning, and then say, of course, those things aren't real. We'll do transcendence for you, safe behind this glass, so you can stuff yourself with shallowness and not get sick of it too fast. You know deep in your gut, don't you, that that's barely half the truth? That it won't feel so freeing anymore beyond the breathless rush of youth, that one day you'll get bored of treading water, scribbling in the sand. That you'll get tired of everything you gather slipping through your hands. I think you know you're hungry for something that would last, that will make your future unafraid and drink the bitterness from your past, something you could truly hold and that would hold you too. She smiled much wider than before. And do you think we would get hungry if there was no such thing as food?
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to the second of our Vision evenings. If you enjoyed Mike's performance just then, or were perhaps struck by it, then I do encourage you to stick around at the end. We're going to have an open mic night, and he'll be performing some more then, and we'll explain a little bit more about that later. But welcome.
Yeah, so Vision is a week of events centered on the person of Jesus Christ, and you really are so welcome here. I'm Jess. I'm a fourth year at John studying international relations, and I think there's something incredibly special about this place that we're all in tonight, because it's a place where we can actually ask serious questions and deep questions. And for me, growing up, like home wasn't a place where I could ask questions about belief or faith or meaning or identity, because so many people had different opinions. It would always end in conflict, so I never felt safe asking these things. And I think this is such an incredible opportunity that you've all got tonight and we've got tonight to be able to ask these questions. And Jesus is the best thing that's ever happened to me, so I'm incredibly excited as well for us to get to delve into that together.
Yeah, I'm Josh. I'm also at John's. I'm in second year studying history. And yeah, like Jess said, I think we all have questions about life and meaning and faith. And we would just really love this place to be a place where you feel comfortable to ask your questions and share your thoughts. Yeah, personally, I've come to a deep conviction that life and joy and hope is found in Jesus. And I'm really excited that you're here to find out a little bit more about him.
So tonight's talk is entitled A Vision for Reality. What is worth living for? If you've been at any of our lunchtimes, you will have already heard Sam speak, but you're going to get to hear a bit more of his personal story tonight as he opens up for us in an interview. And then afterwards, Hamish is going to delve into the Bible for us, and we'll continue looking at these themes and questions through a story of Jesus.
Just a few announcements, though, before we get underway. In the unlikely event of a fire, our fire exits are just down here at the back of this main bit, and then there are 2 exits out in the cafe. Should you need first aid, do alert one of the stewards in the black vision jumpers, and if you need the loo, then we have some luxury facilities just behind the cafe that you can visit. But we're going to invite Hamish onto the stage now, so why don't we give Hamish a welcome. Hamish, thanks so much for being here this week and sharing with us. And to be honest, despite the fact that even though you have an English accent and you have pheasants on your shirt, you still support the Scottish rugby team. We are really glad that you're here, so thanks for being with us. Just by way of further introduction, we've got a couple more questions for you.
Okay, after you've just absolutely slammed me.
Yeah.
No right of response.
Well, I'm assuming you've recovered from the loss on the weekend. But anyway, firstly, would you share with us your...
No. Yeah, of course.
Would you share with us your favourite childhood memory?
Oh, my favourite childhood memory. This will both sound like a deliberate response. I didn't know this question was coming, but it will only highlight the poignancy of me supporting Scotland. Genuinely, one of my favourite childhood memories was when I was 6. It was my first ever television memory, with Scotland winning the Grand Slam against England in Murrayfield. 1990, I could probably, this is how sad I am, list that whole starting 15 to you. Now I'm not going to do that because it's only been downhill since then. So, yeah, there are others that are more serious than that, but that's definitely the one that pops into mind.
Great, and so one other question for you. What is something someone has said to you that has stuck with you for life or shaped the way you see the world?
Yes, from the ridiculous to the sublime. That's a really good question. I did know about this one, and I've had a little bit of a think. I think you know that sort of psychological question where someone says to you, if your house was on fire, what's the first thing you would take? After the genuinely obligatory note of my family, I would take a book that I was given on my 18th birthday. The book's just Lord of the Rings, and in the front cover of the first volume, my grandfather wrote an inscription, and he passed away a few years ago. He's a huge influence on my life, and he simply spoke of the importance as one grows and becomes a man. He was saying, 18th birthday, you formally become a man. He said, I hope you never lose the childish sense of beauty and wonder that you see in the world, that you've come to love in Tolkien, and that you have come to see in Christianity. Now, the reason that is powerful for me, not just because I love him, is because he himself only came to what he would have said was a deep Christian faith when he was 71, a lot later in life. And so to receive that from him was just a very powerful moment in terms of really trying to grasp something lovely about just what it means to be human, but actually about the humanity we see in Jesus. That actually, while the world's a serious place, actually it's right to have a childish sense of beauty and wonder. So there we are, from a really silly answer to quite a serious one.
No, that's great. Thanks. That's really insightful. And I'm
Right.
glad that you prefer Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter. But we're going to hand over to you now.
Great.
Great.
Brilliant.
Should I need this?
No, we're both all right. Great. Guys, thank you so much, like both Josh and Jess have said, for joining us again this evening. If you're coming back, enormously lovely to see you. If this is your first time with us here in the Vision Marquee, you're enormously welcome, and I so hope that this is a good evening for you. I'd love, though, to invite Sam Allberry up. Sam's been our lunchtime speaker. Would you give him a welcome as we welcome him to the stage? That's it there. Great. Well, Sam, good evening.
Hey.
Thanks very much for joining us. You get to sit for this part, because Sam's been stood there for the lunchtimes, so it's nice to give you a break and just to hear a little bit from you. Now, for those of you who have been here for the lunches, you'll have heard a little bit about Sam. For many, though, this is a good chance just to get to know him a little bit more personally and to dig into some of the things that he's been talking about, but also just wider thoughts on his life. Now, Sam, you were born 1975 in
Yep.
Lewisham in London, but you're a proud man of Kent, or Kentish man. You talk about this in the magazines. You've got magazines on your seat, and in the speaker profiles, Sam makes this distinction. Could you explain to us a little bit, like, what is the difference between a man of Kent and a Kentish man?
It is very significant. There's a river that runs through Kent called the Medway, and depending on which side of the Medway you were born or raised, determines whether you are a Kentish man or a man of Kent. And I can't remember which way round it is. I just know that it's really important that I'm one of those and not the other one.
Clearly critical to your identity.
Yeah. I'm not the other one, but I am the one I am.
You are the one you are.
That's significant to
Is
me.
anyone from Kent who can help Sam?
Can any-
Either you're not from Kent or you don't want to
I'll
help.
take help from people from other counties too,
Okay.
if help is on offer.
There we are. So if anyone's willing to help Sam, talk to him about himself afterwards. That'd be very good.
Thank you.
Going on to slightly more kind of actual stuff, serious stuff. Tell us just a little bit about your early life. Give us a sense of what life was like in the 70s, because for many we're going to struggle.
I grew up in Kent. Grew up in a town called Sevenoaks, a fairly leafy, suburban, quiet kind of town. Not much to kind of report, I guess, from my childhood. The 70s, I remember everyone smoking when I was a young kid, and then kind of gradually everyone was then giving up smoking when I was a bit older. So I remember both my parents smoked a lot at the start of life. So that's one kind of visceral difference between then and now. We only had like 2 or 3 TV channels when I was first a kid. So just very different. Yeah.
Okay. Now, with particular regard to your beliefs, and we're exploring this week, as I'm sure you know, the big questions of reality through the lens of the person of Jesus Christ, and thinking tonight about our being, our reality, how do we live. What were your takes on Christianity generally, and on the person of Jesus particularly as you were growing up?
Yeah, I think the best way of describing myself kind of through childhood, through teenagedom, would be I was a non-anti-Christian. I sort of went back and forth about whether I believed in God or not. I mean, through primary school and secondary school, you had bits and pieces of Christianity sort of taught you, but slightly skewed a little bit as well. So I remember in religious studies classes, we would be taught, the ethics of the Sermon on the Mount and that kind of thing. But I don't really feel like I encountered Christianity at any point. So I kind of viewed Jesus as a really moral teacher who, for some reason, everyone killed, and I didn't quite understand what that was about. But I kind of saw him as rather bland, and I didn't find him particularly compelling, because I was really just having him filtered through school teachers who were basically saying, please be a good boy, and using bits of what Jesus said to kind of back that up. So it didn't really compel me to investigate any further.
Okay. So if someone had said to you, almost like a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy question, Sam, what would you say is the meaning of life? How might you have gone about answering?
I don't think I would have known what to say. I knew that there was a meaning, I just didn't know that I had grasped it yet. I had a sense that the life had to mean something. It had to be about something. I didn't believe we were just here by accident. But I didn't really know what that meaning was. And I know I I loved to think about it, but it was kind of like, when it's just in your own head, you don't get very far.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I mean, you're here with us this week in Durham as someone who works for an international Christian ministry. You're full-time talking about Jesus Christ, the meaning he gives to life. You've been a pastor in a church. So obviously something pretty major happened to go from a certain apathy, if that's fair, to actually encouraging people to look into this. Talk us through then what happened to bring about that change.
So I got a weekend job at a coffee shop during my A-levels, and many of the people who worked there were Christians who were my age, and they were the first Christians I really got to know well close up. And this is when I was kind of 16, 17, 18, and these particular Christians I really, really respected. I found friendships at that stage could be quite fickle generally, but these particular Christians had an integrity to them that I really admired. If they said something, they would always follow through with it. I knew I could trust them. And a couple of times they said, hey, do you want to come visit our church? And most of the time when they invited me, I thought of a reason not to. But at the end of A-levels, I had literally nothing else to do. And again, they said, hey, do you want to come to our church youth group? I couldn't think of a reason not to go quick enough. So I said, yeah, okay. And in my mind, I was thinking, I'm not massively interested in this, but I am interested in them. And if this helps me kind of find out what makes them tick, I'd love to find out more about what they believe, just to kind of honor them as friends. So I went along to the local church's youth ministry and didn't quite know what I was going to face when I got there, but heard someone give a gospel presentation just explaining the message of Christianity, and realized immediately that what I was hearing I hadn't heard before and was very different to the image of Christianity I had grown up with.
Okay. So let me just dive into a little bit of that. You mentioned earlier that you kind of thought that Jesus was just quite bland, just another one of the good teachers. What changed about your view of him then?
Yeah, well, the first talk I heard was explaining the message of Jesus, and I suddenly realized Jesus' message wasn't coming to this world and saying, hey, be a good boy. And so actually I began to realize that Jesus didn't come to this world to congratulate good people. He came to this world to find and to seek lost people. And I just had never heard that before. And I suddenly realized, okay, the bland, kind of corny, moralistic Jesus I had grown up imagining isn't the Jesus I'm hearing about from the gospel accounts. The Jesus I'm hearing about from the gospel accounts sounds less bland, more complicated, and far more interesting. And so began to really want to reach into what he had to say.
Okay. And what then was it that, as it were, finally made you trust him to as it were, say, okay, I'm going to give myself over to this guy? Because, again, there's a difference between compelling and someone who you're saying, I'm now going to make you my everything.
Yes. No, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. My experience actually was very similar to the experience of the person you're going to be telling us about from John's Gospel tonight. As I was encountering the message of Jesus, I felt like he was reading me in a way I felt he made more sense of me than I had made of me. And so as I was hearing his message, I had this weird experience of feeling like he was exposing what my heart was like. And I couldn't keep him at arm's length. I thought I was trying to find out about him, but as I was engaging with his message, I was realizing he's saying stuff about the kind of person I am that really, really fits. And I realized that if God did exist and made me, then I didn't know him, and I probably ought to. And I had this deep sense that's probably on me rather than on God. And so I kind of thought, well, actually, that really does mean I am lost. I don't know the God who made me. I'm estranged from him. And so then understanding why Jesus came, why he died and rose again, and realizing that he did that for me, and he did that to bring me back to God. He gave up his own life for me. made me think, well, actually, this is someone I can build an entire life on. This is someone I can trust. And I just had this overwhelming sense if Jesus had done that for me, then my entire life would be better if I gave my life to him. And I didn't know what following Jesus was going to look like. I didn't know half of what he taught. But I just knew that he was good, that he was trustworthy, and therefore, wherever he ended up leading me would be the right place, because it's Jesus, and he will do what is right.
Okay, that's very striking. We'll return to that, I think, because actually that's a really meaningful insight that you arrived at, because prior to that realization, you had been grappling with another aspect of your own lived experience.
Yeah.
Now, for those who weren't here this afternoon, Sam shared with us at lunchtime, in your own words, I think, that you have only ever experienced romantic and sexual attraction for members of the same sex. I don't want to get your words wrong.
Yeah, I think that's what I said.
Yes, okay. Now, you came to that realization before, I think, you came to that realization about Jesus Christ. It was happening in sort of tandem.
Kind of, yeah. So I came to that realization about my sexuality over a long period of time. I'm pretty slow generally, and it just took me probably 3 or 4 years to actually come to terms with, recognize the particular attractions I was experiencing. This was a long time ago. It was a different world then. It was the early 90s. And so the various categories of sexual identity with which we're so familiar now just weren't as readily available then. And so it took me a long time to actually put together that what I was experiencing towards one or two of my friends was romantic attraction. I was becoming aware that I wasn't experiencing those feelings towards girls. I was experiencing those feelings towards one or two of my male friends. And being an idiot, it actually took me a while to realize, oh, that's what. Yeah. I remember when I was 17, I was waiting to return home at the end of the school day. I was waiting for a bus, and I don't know why this came to me as I was standing at a bus stop, but I just remember thinking to myself, I think I'm gay. Right? And then I sort of thought, well, of course you are. If you're having romantic and sexual attractions to guys and not to girls, then yes, you are. But for some reason, that penny just hadn't dropped clearly up until that moment. I was experiencing stuff without kind of realizing what it was I was experiencing. So it's when I was 17 that kind of realization became much clearer in my mind.
Okay, well, thank you for being so open about that. I mean, as you yourself said, 1992, I suppose, when you were 17, but
Yeah.
very different. Neither of us are brilliant at maths, but that's, that was a very different era.
Yeah.
Obviously, particular pressures for someone who's come to that realization about themselves. Lots of fear still about something like AIDS and HIV. Could you just tell us, if you're willing, a little bit about what it was like to live with that self-knowledge, but not really tell anyone, which I think is the situation you're in.
So the cultural pressure then was very different to the cultural pressure now. The cultural pressure then was, I don't want anyone to know this, because there was still, and just saying this makes me realize actually how many of our cultural changes I appreciate, because it is now much easier for people to be honest about these things. But when I was at secondary school, people were bullied for being gay, or people were bullied just because other people thought they might be gay. And that happened to me for a period in my kind of A-levels. And so it's the last thing I wanted people to know was that I actually was experiencing these things. And so it was a time of very, very significant anxiety. It affects me still today, I think. That feeling of not belonging, not being part of what everyone else is into. I just felt like I was a different species to all of my friends, and that they if they knew that, it would be kind of game over for friendship and for any chance of existing peacefully in my particular school. So it was deeply unhealthy, because we're designed to be known, and we're designed to have honesty, and so that level of secrecy about something that personal actually can be quite psychologically damaging, and it was a very difficult time. I was terrified people would kind of realize. Some people were already beginning to make comments about whether I might be gay, just because I didn't have many girlfriends and that kind of thing. So there was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, and I remember thinking, I was beginning to apply to universities, and I remember thinking, well, when I go to university, I knew that in those days, the universities I was applying to had what were called then LGB societies. And so I remember thinking, well, maybe when I go away somewhere else, I can sneak into one of those groups and just kind of maybe explore this aspect of life there. And the other thing, this is going to age me catastrophically, this was before the internet, and so it was quite possible to conceive of living a double life. So I was thinking, okay, when I go to university, I can be gay there. No one at home would ever need to know or find out. And so that was sort of what I was beginning to kind of plan towards.
Okay. And it's striking listening to that, because what you're saying is you're experiencing this dawning self-realization and then a hard experience, while at the same time understanding that your identity is to be found in Jesus Christ, and not this aspect of your reality. So almost not only parallel paths, but converging paths.
Yeah.
But could you just tell us, because there'll be some, I guess, and many will be wondering, hang on, aren't those two things going to just be mutually exclusive? How could you come to that understanding and still say, I want to follow this guy, Jesus? Could you just take us into that maybe perceived tension, if it's a real one?
Yeah, so when I became a Christian, I had no idea what Jesus taught on any of these issues. So I didn't know what it would mean for my sexuality or anything like that. I just knew I wanted to follow Jesus. And so I knew that life now had to wrap entirely around Jesus Christ. I knew enough of him to know that I either had to be all in following him or just not follow him at all. So I was prepared from the very first day of my Christian faith to give Jesus every aspect of my life. And I was willing to trust him with my sexuality, not knowing what he was going to say about it. I didn't know if he was going to say, yeah, it's fine to be gay, or whether he was going to say something different. I just knew that I could trust him. And so there was never any question about where my identity lay, because I knew my life is now about Jesus Christ. It's now defined. Actually, it's defined by his love for me. If any of you guys read John's Gospel, there's a bit where John, who's writing it, refers to himself in third person, often as the disciple whom Jesus loved, which I used to think was kind of sounded a bit obnoxious, as though he's saying, I was Jesus' favorite. What I've come to realize is that John, when you encounter Jesus Christ, what defines you from that point on is not the kind of person that you love, but the fact that you have been loved by Jesus Christ. That suddenly becomes front and center in your consciousness. And so how I saw myself from the moment I became a Christian was, I'm someone who has been loved by Jesus Christ and is now seeking to follow him. Everything else got demoted to a very distant kind of second or third level of identity after that. And so I didn't sort of base my identity around sexuality, and sexual identity just wasn't a thing then in the way that it is now. That wasn't an obvious kind of move to make.
Okay. Now, you spent a gap year working in a local coffee shop, and you used that time to go along to your local church and to do what you were saying, which is to start finding out not only what Jesus said about this area, but I suppose every area in many ways. As you started to understand the biblical sexual ethic, we could call it, did that test your convictions about the goodness of Jesus? How did that dawning knowledge start shaping who you were?
Yeah, I think from somewhere I had already got a notion that following Jesus wasn't necessarily going to be easy in every area of life, but I had this deep sense from the beginning of my Christian life that discipleship is costly. Jesus always says that. And with a number of Christian friends, getting to know people in my church, I could see the way discipleship was being mapped out in lots of worked examples, and I knew that for everyone, there were ways in which following Jesus put a significant constraint on how they lived, on their ambitions, their instincts, the way that they behaved, all those kinds of things. And so I already had a category of, even if I may not have been familiar with the specific verse that it comes from, I already had a category of deny self and take up your cross and follow Jesus. That actually following him does mean yielding life to him. But I was so overwhelmed with the sense that Jesus is good. And so I figured that whatever discipleship might cost me, it's going to be good because Jesus is good. And my life is not going to be improved if I try and run it according to my wisdom rather than giving it over to Jesus. And so when I began to kind of figure out some of the things Jesus says about sexual ethics, we looked at some of those things this afternoon, it didn't immediately land on me as being unfair or too big an ask or any of those things. Partly because I already had this concept of, well, that's just discipleship is, Jesus, you put Jesus first. But I also think one of the things that possibly made it easier for me then than it would have been if I was in the same stage now was we didn't freight our sexuality with quite as much significance as we do today. And so it's interesting. I had lots of great conversations after the session this afternoon. I'm so grateful to people who came, particularly people who have a very different perspective on this. And it's just interesting having lots of conversations with them. People were coming up and sharing differing points of view, and we had some lively discussions. And I just want to honour those folks for coming along and engaging with this. But it's interesting, one of the key bits of pushback from this afternoon is, but this is who you are. And in our cultural time today, by and large, this is how people understand their identity, is you are your sexual attractions. They define you more than anything else does. And therefore, if Jesus is calling on you to constrain those attractions in any way, that is losing who you are. When I was a Christian, that's just not the way culture thought. I never thought my sexual feelings were who I was. I never kind of saw those as being centrally defining of who I am as a human being. And so yielding my sexuality to Jesus didn't feel like I was giving up life itself, that it was unfair, or that I was repressing who I truly am, because those things just were never that significant to me. And I think actually the cultural time in which we live, there are certain things that I'm glad about that are the case now that weren't the case 20 years ago. But I also think freighting these issues of sexual identity with so much weight and seriousness actually makes this discussion far, far more difficult for people than it would have been at a different time. It was difficult for me for other reasons in the 90s. I think it's difficult for people now for different reasons, because if you're constantly being told you are your sexuality, then this becomes the most significant thing in your life, and anything that threatens it suddenly becomes, the stakes couldn't be higher. And so I think it's an unhealthy aspect of our culture at the moment. I just think it puts so much pressure on that one part of life and making it so significant.
I'd love to just, I suppose, press you a little bit there, because you're acknowledging that culture has changed, and yet what you're saying is the eternal word of God, to use the language Christians might use, calls us to a particular form of sexual ethic, sex within marriage, between a man and a woman, and you would say, because of Jesus, you voluntarily are leading a celibate life. What would you say to someone who would say that in this culture, that's outrageous, or that is dangerous to yourself? Mm-hmm. I don't want to make that awkward, but how would you address that? Yeah,
and that's a very obvious thing for people to think today. I get that, I really do. Somebody once said to me, "You're a bit like a unicorn." They said, I'd always heard of people like you, I just never thought I'd meet one. I sort of heard you were out there somewhere, that you might exist. I've been called worse, to be fair. I get it, and if our baseline cultural assumptions today are true, then I am really wasting my life by being single. But only if our baseline cultural assumptions are true. And one of the things I was trying to say to some of the folks earlier as we were discussing this is, a lot of this really boils down to what we believe most makes us human. And if our baseline belief is that sexual fulfillment is one of the key essential ingredients of being a human being, then of course, voluntarily foregoing that fulfillment means I'm going to live some kind of shriveled existence. But two things make me not convinced of that cultural assumption. The first is the life of Jesus himself. He is the most fully human and complete person who ever lived, and yet he was never married, he was never in a sexual relationship. So I can't say that a life without sex is a reduced form of humanity, because then I'll be saying Jesus lived a reduced form of humanity, and I don't believe he did. But the other thing that makes me kind of just hesitate to accept that kind of cultural assumption is that I just don't find it compelling. I know too many people who would say they're sexually fulfilled in the sense that they are able to have exactly the kind of sex they've always wanted to have with the kind of people they've wanted to have it with, in whatever way they've wanted to have it. And they're not people who say to me that their life is now complete. I don't think sex is a bad thing. I think it my Christian faith tells me it was God's idea, not ours. He invented it. It wasn't something we discovered behind his back. But it's not ultimate. And I just find this message we so often hear that you are your sexuality, I just think that's bad news. Because if you're not sexually fulfilled, it tells you that the best in life is passing you by, and if you are sexually fulfilled, it's saying to you, hey, this is as good as it gets. And for a lot of people, it can't possibly deliver on that level of expectation.
I would love to keep asking you questions. We could talk about this a lot more. It's fascinating. And please, if you have either very personal questions about this, and we're hugely conscious that for many, just like you, Sam, this is a big personal issue, please do come and chat to Sam or chat to a friend who you trust. We would love to work this through with anyone who would like to do so. Time is against us, though, and one final question before Josh and Jess introduce us to the woman you mentioned earlier. We're meeting a woman who has an encounter with Jesus, and 28 years ago, you had that encounter too, turned your life upside down. Yeah. I think that's right. Could you tell us, you were telling us where true satisfaction is not found, that the Christian sexual ethic cuts against the grain of the world, but whether it's in the question of sexuality or just broadly, how has that encounter with Jesus for you shaped you now? Where is true satisfaction for you found? Yeah. And with this, we'll close.
This would be, I hope, what every Christian in the room would say, is that when you meet Jesus, it changes everything. It changes every single aspect of life and turns everything upside down. And for me, it won't be a surprise, therefore, to hear me say that actually true satisfaction is found in Jesus. One of the things Jesus said that I reflect on probably more than anything else is when Jesus says, also in John's Gospel, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never hunger. He who believes in me will never thirst. I used to be puzzled by that claim, I am the bread of life, because I kind of thought, I don't really know what that means. When Jesus says, I'm the light of the world, I kind of get what he's getting at. When he says, I'm the bread of life, I'm thinking, well done. I mean, I like bread. Good for you or something. I don't know. But I began to realize that in the context Jesus said that in, bread was the primary staple food that you ate. And so if you didn't have bread, you just didn't live. And so for Jesus to say, I'm the bread of life, is for him to say that he is to our souls what bread is to a starving stomach. And all of us instinctively, and those of us who are Christians, we still wrestle with this. We all instinctively look in other places for the bread of life. For many of us in the culture that we're in today, we will be looking for the bread of life in romantic or sexual fulfillment. And it's just not, it just can't deliver that level of satisfaction. It can't fulfill us like that. But Jesus can. And only Jesus can. We're not going to find the bread of life anywhere else. Wherever we look for it, we will always be hungry. Whatever it is, however much we get of it, we will always want more of it. And it will never be enough. And you see this kind of quietly driving some people crazy in life, that whatever it is they've made their thing in life, however far they go with that thing, however much they get of it, it's never ever enough. Whereas with Jesus, he is the only relationship that will never ever disappoint us. He is the only thing that can satisfy at the very deepest level our very, very hungry souls.
Well, Sam, thank you for being so open, sharing so much of yourself with us this evening. And if you would like to grab Sam and talk to him, I know that he'd be happy to do so afterwards. For now, Josh and Jess are going to come back, introduce us to the reading we've got this evening. But can we just say thank you very much to Sam for joining us?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Our reading is from John 4 today, verses 1 to 26. It's on page 7 if you want to read along, or you can open a Bible if you have that.
Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard, Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it was not Jesus himself but his disciples who baptized, he left Judea and started back to Galilee. But he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon.
A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food.
The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans."
Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water."
The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and with his sons and his flocks drank from it?"
Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give them will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life."
The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water."
Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come back."
The woman answered him, "I have no husband."
Jesus said to her, "You're right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you've said is true."
The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem."
Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth."
The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us."
Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who is speaking to you."
Well, good evening again. It's nice to actually see you. When the lights are up, I can see who's out there in front of me, rather than the lights being blinded. It's brilliant to welcome you here. So glad that you can join us. I wonder what you made of that little bit of a passage as Josh and Jess read it out to you. That's where we're going to be based just for the next 25 minutes or so as we look at, again, just what God has said in his word. This is why we as Christians have the confidence that we do. You may have been struck by the confidence with which Sam was speaking. It's because he's persuaded, as so many here are, that this is an accurate account of who Jesus is. Last night, if you were with us, we were looking at the big picture introduction to this gospel. This is just one of the eyewitness accounts about Jesus' life. This is the full version of that which was reproduced in the magazine for you. That goes up to verse 26. The chapters are a wee bit longer than that. So if you want to, please take this away, have a look at it for yourself, and see what you make of it as the evening wears on. But I do wonder what you made of that little account. There's some bits that are slightly baffling in it, and hopefully that can be something we work on together this evening. But as we start, I actually want to ask you what you make of life. What is your vision for being? You see, you could read any number of writers down the years. You could read the great classical authors of the philosophical age of Athens, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. You could look at the romantic poets of the 18th century. You could listen to the poets of our 21st century age, those who write the pop songs that so fill the airwaves. You could listen to Mike and the poetry he wrote for us this evening. You could read this ancient text, and you would see, I think, that every single one of us, wherever we land on questions of faith, wherever we think true meaning is found, every single one of us is on a particular quest. Every single one of us is on a particular journey. We are on our way to a particular destination. I did a little word association thing with my children at home, and they chose this picture behind me. I said to them, guys, look, if I say the word quest to you and you go and Google some images, what do you find? What should I show the students down in Durham? And my son found this one, a picture of an open road stretching off into the distance. The question I suppose we're all asking is, where is it heading? Well, I think the answer from both culture and Christianity is that we are often looking for satisfaction. Not satisfaction in the sense of a Mick Jagger song or the Rolling Stones of any sort. A satisfaction that is deep, that is meaningful, that is true. A satisfaction that we might put in slightly more sort of flowery language as human flourishing, as being who we are meant to be, as finding our identity in such a way that it unlocks not only the future for us, but the present. I wonder if any of that resonates with you. And I suppose as many souls as there are in the room will give different answers to their understanding of where that sort of satisfaction and flourishing is to be found. Here, we meet a woman who is looking for that as well. We also meet here a man who claims to offer the satisfaction that she seeks and she so desperately needs. But what I hope we'll see together tonight is that the answer that is found in that man, Jesus Christ, is both more beautiful and more challenging than we might possibly have conceived of. That actually, just as Sam's world was turned upside down on that day in 1992, so actually for us, we will see that this man, Jesus, seeks to turn our own worlds on their heads. But in that turning, in that disruption, in that entry into time and space, like John says on the first page of this book, we will find the true hope, the true satisfaction, the true goal of our souls, the end of the quest which we so often find ourselves on. This story has always struck me as quite a cinematic one. You might find that if you were to read John's account, it's very vivid, it's very gripping, and it's very true to life. Here's just two people having a face-to-face relationship. And so I've tried to chunk up our time together in I suppose, the acts of a drama. And we might say that if we were having the heading on the screen that fades to black as we come into our first scene in verse 1, the word that might appear is parched. Parched conjures up images of dry ground. Here's just a riverbed in the Middle East. But actually, parched is a good description of both our main characters tonight, of both Jesus and the Samaritan woman. And you can see that when you get just to little number 6 there. Jesus is on a journey, and he has to go through Samaria. Samaria was a sort of no man's land for Jewish people, the Badlands. I live in St. Andrews, which is a university town even smaller than Durham, if you can imagine such a thing. Half an hour's walk is an unthinkable horror for a St. Andrews student. Morrison's, the local supermarket, is 25 minutes away, and they genuinely call that area just before Morrison's the Badlands. Tells you a little bit about St. Andrews as well. Jesus, though, is in a place that for Jews was, if not forbidden, was certainly not the place you want to find yourself after dark. The Jews had real problems with the Samaritans, and the Samaritans had real problems with the Jews. It was a historical thing. It was an ethnic thing. As we'll see later, it's a religious thing as well. So Jesus is already off the map. But he's not only off the map, he is thirsty. He sits down by the well, and it was about noon. So it's the height of the sun, it's hot, it's dry, and Jesus wants a drink. Verse 7, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. So we're like, okay, Jesus is thirsty. Just a little note showing that Jesus is a man, he's a human like the rest of us. He had physical needs, and what he needs at this point is water. But that idea of thirst, of desire, of searching, and of having that desire met becomes central to this whole interaction. I wonder if you noticed that as the guys read it. I wonder if you noticed it in the note of hunger through Mike's piece. I wonder if you noticed it in Sam's language of the bread of life. Hunger and desire is a major part of our human quest. Jesus asks for water. And the Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" She knows that to this man, Jesus, she is an outsider. And John, just in case we're missing the point, gives an editorial note, for Jews do not associate with Samaritans. And it's just a little note. But to anyone reading this in the first century, or hearing it told or preached or spoken in the marketplace or the synagogue, already we are in a boundary-breaking social interaction. Jesus has crossed a major ethnic and religious divide, and just think how much our own world struggles with those. It's very hard to imagine the first century. But an Orthodox Jewish man often opened his day with a prayer saying, "Lord, I thank you I'm not a Samaritan." He also might have said, and there's records of this, "Lord, I thank you that I am not a woman." Not only is Jesus breaking taboos by speaking to a Samaritan, it is even more so that he, a Jewish man, a rabbi no less, might speak to a Samaritan woman. She is an outcast to Jesus in at least, therefore, 2 major ways. But actually, John, our author, our cinematographer, tells us that she's an outcast to more than just Jesus. I wonder if you picked up on it. It's the height of the sun. It's the driest, hottest part of the day. It's around the time of the harvest, so we're talking about the back end of summer. And she is going out to the well at noon to draw her water. That tells us that this woman is an outcast even to her own community. Wells were focal points of any settlement in the ancient world. You always built your settlement by a ready site of water. And so you would go, often in that cultural context, the women would go to draw the water. And in the summer, you do it at the time when it's cool. It makes sense. The water's at its coolest. You've got to take at least a couple of pails. You lower down the well. You lift it up. It's hot work. It's heavy work. It's back-breaking work. You want to do it when it's cooler and also when your mates are there, a sort of social activity. I remember as a fresher, the guy who had a car, we would, just because we could, at midnight, hop in the car and go to Sainsbury's up at the Arneson Centre to get something ridiculous, like a bar of chocolate. Just did it because you could, and you could hang out together. How much more when you need the water? But she is, for some reason, right on the margins. Maybe she's ashamed. Maybe she's feeling guilty of something. We don't know at this stage what it is, and yet we know that it is real. And yet notice that Jesus loves her. I mean, that word love, you may say at this point, is too big, but that will become clear as we go through. But Jesus is the one who steps down, as it were, to her. He is the one who steps out and across, as it were, to her. And in that sense, Jesus is doing exactly what we might expect if we read just the first 4 chapters of this gospel, because he is following the logic of God. We said last night in John chapter 1 that God is the God who steps down into our world to meet us. Like a father might stoop down in order to talk to his troubled child, so God has done so in the person of Jesus. And here he enacts it, speaking to one who maybe had never had someone for years actively engage with her socially. She knows it's surprising. Later on, you'd see that his own disciples know it's surprising because they just come back and stand and gawp and they're like, what on earth is Jesus doing? And here we see something of the logic of the love of God in Jesus Christ. One who will go to the marginalized, who will associate with the outcast in order that he might lift them up. You'll notice that the reason for her social outsider status becomes clear. Jesus answered her, verse 10, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you'd have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Not your normal thing to say in a social interaction. And she is a bit confused. Sir, the woman said, you've nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, looking back into the stories of the patriarchs in the Old Testament, the one who gave us the well and drank from it himself? And Jesus says something intriguing. He says that everyone who drinks the water that he can give will be never thirsty again. It's a contrast to normal human water. We're going to loop back to that detail in a moment. But if you would, just look down with me again to verse 16. She's keen to get this living water. Jesus says, go and get your husband. She says, I have no husband. And Jesus' next words are shocking. Shocking because he knows the truth about her. Shocking because it reveals that she is ashamed about this truth. She doesn't volunteer the history she's experienced. But Jesus says, you are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true. Now let me say, Jesus is not here seeking to shame her. In that cultural context, it was only men who had the right of divorce. And so what Jesus is putting his finger on here is that this is a woman who has been, for reasons unknown, discarded by 4 men, who is now, as it were, on her 5th. Sorry, I got that wrong, verse 18. Had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not. 6 different men. Well, we don't know all the details. But we know that here is someone who has been broken by the culture around her, who may well be complicit in that in some fashion, and who as a result is now absolutely on the edges. Jesus knows the truth about her, which she is so tempted to conceal. And the reason I say that she is parched is because actually here is just a picture of somebody who has, it seems, no meaning in life, who has been on her own quest, and who has only found dry, barren ground in the arena of love, of romance, of sex, and of sexuality. Here's someone who's been left wanting, who's been left empty, who's been left needing, and she conceals it, even from the one who's reached out to her. I simply want us to stop there and ask if that resonates in any way, shape, or form. You know, Sam spoke of how so many wrestle with a sense of emptiness in our present cultural moment. And there is a very strong chance, using slightly academic language, there's a certainty that there will be folk here with us this evening who know exactly what this feels like. It may not be in the arena of sexuality, it may not be in the arena of love, it could be in any area. But you will know what it's like to go out into the world, to go to the library, to go to the coffee shops, to go down to the rugby field, to go to the social, to go to the tutorial, and to go deliberately putting on your mask, to go hiding your true self, to go fearing that people might know the inconsolable longing in your own heart, to go fearing that people might know you as you are. The 20th century sociologist Irving Goffman wrote a book called Dramaturgy. And he said, basically, to be human is to be an actor. And the number of different theaters we occupy, the number of different relationships we engage in, we have a mask for each. And that is because deep down, we know that we're lacking in some fashion. That's where this woman is at. And it is into this context that Jesus speaks, and into this context that Jesus offers living water, something that can quench our thirst, something that can heal that longing, something that can lead us to a true understanding of what we are meant for. And the question of what we're meant for is what drives us on in our story. Because you see, if the woman is parched, she is also searching. I wonder what you made of her response to Jesus' knowledge about her secret self. Jesus has revealed something absolutely deeply personal and true about her. And in verse 19, she seems to give a reasonably obvious response to that culture. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you're a prophet. Okay, you're a guy who knows stuff. But she then does something funny. She introduces the word worship. Now, you may think worship is a really kind of religious-y word, and on one level it is, isn't it? It has connotations of church buildings, of the cathedral perhaps, of songs, of organs, of all the trappings of religious finery. She, though, sees worship as a natural category to move on as she discusses reality with this surprising stranger. And it's because worship, which the Jews and the Samaritans differed over, as you can see there in verses 21 down to 24, worship is to do with something much, much more foundational than just what we do in a church building. Worship is to do with our very selves. Worship is to do with what we're searching for. You see, worship to the worldview of the Bible is to do with the thing that is absolutely ultimate in your life. The thing that is at the center of your understanding of yourself. The thing to which you orient your life, that which you live for, that which gives you meaning, that to which you dedicate the best of yourself. The finest of your words, the most profound of your thoughts, the deepest of your desires. The thing to which that goes is that which you worship. Jews and Samaritans differed over precisely who God was and how he was to be worshipped. Today, our differences are perhaps more wide, not only over whether to worship the God of the Old Testament in one of two ways, but which God do you worship? And how? But actually, for someone here tonight who's not a religious person of any shape or form, worship is a category for you as well, I want to suggest. Because we all have something which we live for. We all have something which takes the best of us. We all have something with which we willingly or unwillingly live. And I wonder what yours might be. You know, over my time, I had 11 years in Durham as a student here and then living and working. So many Durham students I knew and loved lived for the life to come. Not anything about eternity, but the life beyond university. I'm going to work really hard in my first year to get an internship. And I'm going to work really hard in my second and third year to get a good degree. And the job that I've acquired through the internship, I'm going to work really hard at that so I can earn the money that's going to give me the life I want to lead and perhaps provide for the family that I long to have, and so on and so forth. Maybe you worship your career. For many others, it's those we love and respect, isn't it? Our families, our friends, those peers whose respect we crave. You could fill in the blanks. A question you could ask yourself is, how would you finish this sentence? If only I had this, then my life would have meaning. What goes in your blank? There's a very good chance that how you'd answer that in the quietness of your heart is what you worship. Unless you think that this is just a Christian taking a Christian word, worship, and twisting it to talk to people who aren't sure what they think. I want to just read out something to you from an author called David Foster Wallace. He was a great American writer, sadly passed away a number of years ago. He was an avowed atheist, and in a commencement address, a graduation speech at Kenyon College, he said this to the students there, students who are very similar to yourselves. Gifted, able, life unfurling before them like that open road, that quest. He says this, here's something else that is weird but true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There's no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you'll never have enough, never feel you have enough. It's the truth, he says, quoting. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die 1,000,000 deaths before they finally grieve you. Worship your intellect, and you will always find someone smarter than you. And so he goes. Striking, isn't it? There's no such thing as atheism, really? Well, Jesus would agree. There's no such thing as not worshipping. Jesus would say, that's absolutely right. And perhaps the most shocking aspect, that whatever we worship, if it is of this world, will eat you alive. That's strong language. But ultimately, Jesus would agree. Here is a woman who has worshipped something other than the true God truly, and is being eaten alive. Elsewhere in John's Gospel, the language of darkness is used for that attitude, to not worship God, but to worship the things of this world, to take the good stuff from the Creator, but ignore the one who gives it to you. Elsewhere in John's Gospel, the language of sin is used to describe that. And Jesus says that is not what this woman was made for. He says it's not what we have been made for. He says it is not the inevitable destination that we have been made for. Destruction is not the end, because he has come to give hope. Notice he says that God seeks those who worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth. That God wants people who will turn away from the things that are consuming them literally, and will turn to the one who he has sent, Jesus Christ, his Son. So I want to ask you a weighty question, okay? Full disclosure. What is it that you are living for? What is it that you're worshiping? And how can you be confident that what you worship will not destroy you? See, Jesus offers a better way. Because if this woman is parched, if this woman is searching, by the end, we could say that her thirst has been quenched. Do you remember back at the start of their discussion? Jesus says this, if you knew the gift of God, verse 10, and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. He's speaking about himself. He's saying to this woman, full of thirst, full of hunger, like we heard in the spoken word, full of a desire for the bread of life, full of a longing for satisfaction, but finding it nowhere, only finding dry and dusty ground that is a foretaste of the death and destruction that sin deserves. He says to her, if you knew me, I would give you living water. Have you ever been really thirsty in life, like properly thirsty, physically? I remember when my family lived in Pakistan, my brother and I went for a walk up in the Northwest Highlands, an area now that would be totally off limits, out near Peshawar towards the border with Afghanistan. And we got lost. It was a really stupid thing to do. It was like an oven, 54 degrees at midday, and we had taken a 330 milliliter bottle of water. Genuinely muppets. And I have never been as thirsty as that. I hope never to be as thirsty as that again. I'm sure we were a very, very long way from dying, but at that point as a 16-year-old, I really wasn't too sure. I mean, it really was bad. And then we came around the corner and realized we'd just been blinded by the sun off the rocks, and my dad and mum were there the whole time. So panic over, have a bit of a laugh. But the relief came when the water was given to us. and our thirst was slaked. It was brilliant. That is the state of the human heart away from Jesus Christ, according to ultimately God himself. And what Jesus holds out is a bottle of water whose effects will never wear off. That's why he ends the account that Josh and Jess read for us on such a dramatic note. Then Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am he, I am the Messiah in her own words. I am God's long-promised Savior who's come to make the world new again and who has come to make you new again, if only you will have me. That's what he's saying to her. And that is what is achieved. If you wanted to check this out in your own time in this booklet, please do. The conclusion to the woman's story is found a little bit later on, a little bit after the point at which our reading finished in verse 26. You see, this woman who has been a total outcast, who has been on the margins of her own culture, let alone the wider culture, having met with Jesus, runs back to the town from which she's been expelled, as it were, and says this, he told me everything I've ever done. Just think of that. Think of the change. On the edges, at the well, at noon, all the way off stage. Now charging back to the community that would have nothing to do with her and saying, this man told me everything I've done. This man knew my wrongs. This man knew my sins. This man knew my brokenness. This man knew my hurt. This man knew my need and my thirst. And it's good news. That's staggering. Because she knows that the exposure of Jesus of her heart is only for her healing. That the revelation of her thirst is only so that he might quench it. Just like Sam knew that Jesus was good and true and trustworthy, even knowing him in all of his mess. Just like I know, with my, as Josh was saying, English-sounding, pheasant shirt-wearing mask on of respectability, that Jesus knows me in all of my sin and shame, in all of my judgment-worthy rejection of God, in all of my darkness. He knows me, and that is good, because he loves. You may ask, how can that sort of transformation happen? The answer comes right through this gospel. Because Jesus loves the unlovable very much to the point of death on a cross. Taking sin and shame on himself, taking judgment on himself. That thirsty outcast like us, like you if you would believe in him, can come home and can be liberated. That which was a mark of shame is now a mark of joy. And I want to suggest that that is where true satisfaction is found as we finish. If you're someone who is here knowing that you're thirsty, knowing that a glass of wine, excellent though it might be, will not quench it, knowing that all the snake bites in the world will not calm the ache in your soul, knowing that all the romantic partners will not satisfy as the bread of life, knowing that you are profoundly in need, if that is you, well, let me say Jesus is for you. In every way that phrase might mean. He's for you because he loves you. He's for you because he would have that face-to-face relationship with you. He's for you because he dies for you. He's for you in that he is good and will never let you down. And if that's you, and Jesus is for you, the invitation is for you too. He would give living water to all who'd believe in him, even this very evening. And it is an invitation, but it's a powerful invitation. It's a pressing invitation. Now, you may well be someone who just thinks, honestly, Hamish, this is bonkers. How do I know it's true? How do I know it's trustworthy? Well, look, if that's you, please ask your questions. I'd love to talk to you. Sam would love to talk to you. Anyone would. I'd urge you to take this away and see if you think that it could be true. Might that be who Jesus truly is? It's what we're going to be spending the next 3 evenings looking at, the other lunchtimes, the afternoon talks, just delving into the question of who Jesus is. But equally, you may know that actually in this woman, you hear your reality. I was struck by what Sam said, that as he heard the news about Jesus explained, it was as though Jesus got him better than anyone had. It may be that you're here tonight saying, yeah, you know, that is me. Well, let me invite you, not on my authority, but on who Jesus is, to believe in him, to accept that living water, won for you in his death on the cross, that you too may have your thirst quenched. Not through just being yourself, but through finding yourself in Jesus. I'm just going to say, as we finish, a short prayer, just talking to God. If you would like to echo these words, then please feel free. And Jesus is for you. It would mean that your world has been turned upside down. So I'm just going to say them out loud, have a listen to them. If you don't want to pray, that's absolutely fine. I'd love you just to think on them and ask whether they might be true for you as well. Heavenly Father, I'm sorry for the ways in which I have so often sought meaning and satisfaction in places other than Jesus, your Son. Thank you for who he is and that he offers living water. Thank you that he died for me, that I might know you and find true life in him. And please help me to follow him all of my days. Amen. Let me say that if you have prayed that prayer, I would love to talk to you. I'll just be down here at the front. I'd love to answer any questions anybody may have. And please do chat to the friends who brought you. Above all, please keep on thinking these things through. And Josh and Jess will explain how we might be able to do that a little bit more. Thank you very much for listening so patiently.